Thank you, everyone, for being here at this late hour of the afternoon. At 5 o'clock, we will have a reception, so you can keep that in mind. That you can. Who was saying slurping? That was Ellie. She used the word slurp a lot, and I kept thinking, can we all translate that into the languages that we know? The word slurp. Think about that. But right now, we have our last panel, and we have four translators who we've yet to meet. Anton has joined them as the keynote speaker at the end, but the first four will be sharing some of their stories and reflections about translating with us before Shahzad Bashir, who's a professor at Brown in Religious Studies Department, leads the discussion, leads a roundtable discussion. So first we have Malad Faiza from Brown University. We have Daisy Rockwell, who's currently doing one semester at Princeton.
Yeah.
Is that right? We have Damien Searles, who's doing a whole year at the Wesleyan Writing Center, has a longer name. And we have Bruna Dantas Lobata, who is accepted a job at Grinnell College as a tenure track professor, and Anton, who we've met last night. Thank you very much.
Okay.
There.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming to our roundtable today. My name is Milad Faiza, and I translate from English into Arabic and also from Arabic into English. And I'm going to talk today about my translation of the Seasonal Quartet by Ellie Smith. Can you hear me? Sounds okay. I translated 3 novels so far, and as you can see here, we have the quartet in English, from left to right, autumn, winter, spring, summer, and only 3 done so far. Hopefully the other one will be available, hopefully this fall. And as you know, unfortunately, we have to do another job in order to translate. I was telling one of my colleagues that without working, here at Brown, I wouldn't be able probably to provide for my family and translate, because this is the night job that I do. Unfortunately, hundreds of hours, probably less than $1 per hour, probably. They call it labor of love, of course. We love what we're doing, but unfortunately, we cannot live from translating or literary translation, especially only. Yeah. So Ellie Smith, started this seasonal project in 2016, and over the period of 5 years, she crafted 4 novels amid significant global events. In this series of stand-alone yet interconnected novels, she delved into major issues that profoundly influenced Britain and the world, including Brexit, the Trump presidency, the refugee dying in the sea and held in detention centers in Europe and the UK, the Black Lives Matter movement, and COVID-19, of course. And for you who are not familiar with her work, she is a Scottish author, playwright, academic, and journalist. And in addition to the seasonal quartet, she wrote many novels, short story, and plays. And she won many awards, such as the European Literature Prize for Spring, Orwell Prize for Summer, Autumn, and How to Be Both were both shortlisted for the Booker Prize. I began this translation project in 2017, and they have so far translated into Arabic 3 novels of the quartet, and I'm currently working on Summer. And while I appreciated Ellie Smith's distinctive style, characterized by fragmentation and wordplay, I sometimes feel overwhelmed and struggle to match her creativity. However, I find that the themes she addressed are important and compelling, motivating me to persevere and creatively navigate through the challenges of the translation process. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about the puns and wordplay, focus on the words, grammatical ambiguity of English compared to Arabic, difference in function of grammatical spelling mistakes in English versus Arabic, the very informal language that sometimes uses, and names with double meanings and some cultural references that are sometimes obscure or difficult to translate. Um, the main challenge I faced when translating Ellie Smith's novels was capturing her distinct style. I chose not to only translate the content, but also to reflect in my Arabic translation the stylistic elements. This meant retaining long sentences and creating new words when needed to convey Smith's original language, including any new terms she introduced and confusing punctuation at times. Ellie Smith loves puns and wordplay. James Wood said in one of his articles in the New Yorker, the Scotch writer Ellie Smith is surely the most pun-besotted of contemporary novelists. And in her first novel of the quartet, in the opening pages of Autumn, Ellie Smith initiates her play on words with the noun bearings, and the adjective bear, while simultaneously inviting her readers to participate in this linguistic game, shown a meta-commentary through the tale of John Keats with panning. You can see here the word pan that's very early, and if you can read this passage, autumn poet, winter Italy, days away from dying, he found himself panning like there was no tomorrow. Poor chap, there really was no tomorrow. Since I'm talking about challenges, so I'm just going to give a few examples. And the word home, for example, appears about 26 times in Autumn in English. It can refer to the place where we live, our country of origin, or often sometimes the home office of the home department. However, in Arabic, it's not the case. I use, for example, the word bait for both home and country in my translation, hoping that the context itself and Ellie Smith's obsession with play will help the reader understand my choice. But of course, I don't feel strongly about that choice because I know there is something lost in that translation. And here's another example where we can also see Ellie Smith's focus on the acronym SA for A. It's the name of a security company that recurs throughout the series. The entire sentence in this example is about the shape of the word, which is also not possible to convey in Arabic without a footnote, or choosing a totally different approach, such as focusing on the sound of the word instead of its shape. Here she is comparing the word SA for A to the word safer and sofa. And of course, seems kind of random comparison, but the shape, they look exactly the same, which is something almost impossible to convey in Arabic if you're trying to do the same thing. And also, this linguistic play continues throughout Ellie Smith's seasonal quartet with numerous examples such as the word still, for example. Here we can see in Autumn as well. Unfortunately, now. So we cannot see the top. But anyway, Elizabeth at last gets her phone out. She keys in the word still on her phone just to see what will come up. The internet provides her instantly with a series of sentences to show usage of the word. How still everything was. She still had Jonathan's hand. When they turned around, Alex was still on the horse. Still, it did look stylish. As you can see, you need many words to translate that from English into another language. So, trying to accurately reflect these linguistic nuances can be difficult and sometimes impossible, necessitating sacrifices or the inclusion of distracting footnotes. Another challenging issue occurs when translating Ellie Smith and English literature in general into languages that lack gender-neutral pronouns is the sacrifice of ambiguity. The word child that was repeated 26 times in autumn, 45 times in winter, is impossible to keep it neutral or neural. The French translator Maurice Edgar Coindreau, who translated Faulkner, dealt with this issue and wrote about. He said ambiguity is one aspect of Faulknerian obscurity. The English language lends itself readily to multiple interpretations, an exceptional case in French. This was the problem faced by the translator of the unvanquished. Is unvanquished in the masculine or the feminine? in the singular or the plural. Here, the word child in this text is neither feminine or masculine, but when you do that in Arabic, it's impossible. You have to make a choice. That's left. And in addition to these issues, also sometimes she intentionally includes text with grammatical or spelling mistakes. And this is a very difficult issue to deal with Arabic because of the sociolinguistic stats of Arabic language. People are not native speakers of Arabic. They learn the modern standard classical Arabic in schools. So making a mistake, it can be scanned in an Arabic text. And for me to translate these mistakes into mistakes in my text that make the reader just throw the book away and stop reading. And you can imagine that. This is in the middle of the text, but the more challenging issue here, I have only 1 minute left, is this is the third book of the quartet, which is Spring. Spring started with a chapter made of sentences that they don't make sense together, and also written in different fonts. And the reader will not find out what's going on until page 323. We will find out in that page that this text actually is combined, is collected by a young child, 12 years old, Florence, put together. She copied them from Twitter. They are tweets reflecting the polarization in the British society, and a lot of violence and slang, and sometimes even German words in this text. So starting a chapter like that in Arabic with this kind of nonsense, it will make the reader as well immediately probably stop reading. And of course, I have some faith in my reader, but those readers who I have faith in them, they are very small number, because very few people probably will wait until page 323 to find out what's going on. Just very quick, a few things I would like to add. Time is over now. And here we have another case with names in English. One of the main characters in Spring, his name is Richard, and his beloved friend Paddy called him Double Dick. Double Dick is one of the main characters in Charles Dickens' novels. Short stories, but here he was confused for many years why his friend calls him Double Dick, and he thought sometimes maybe because of his sexual power, but she told him at the end, no, it's not. But anyway, for me as a translator to deal with that name, it's really very confusing. And there are many other things, I can talk about. Unfortunately, we have only 10 minutes, so thank you, and maybe we can continue this in the conversation.
Yes, it's my turn, right? Okay, can you hear me? So I've been traveling a lot in the last couple of years, and I keep being asked to explain what translation is in kind of settings where people are not so sure. And so I just kind of make things up. All translators love metaphors, so I'm always making up metaphors. And then sometimes these things get recorded. And I don't know what I said, right? So I was at the Lahore Literature Festival last year, and a very earnest young man raised his hand, and he said, I saw you on YouTube use a Lego metaphor, and I would like you to expand on that if you could. And he was very, very serious about it. So I just made something up on the spot. But I started to enjoy it. So after that, I went home and I started to write down all the metaphors. And I'm not going to say they're poems, because that would be giving them sort of, I don't know, too much loftiness. But maybe they're sort of creative nonfiction. I don't know. I don't have an MFA, so maybe Bruna can help me categorize what I'm doing. So I'm going to start with the Lego metaphor. This is the Lego metaphor, part 1. I once saw a Lego metaphor for translation on some online forum somewhere. I liked it, but it was slightly off, and then I forgot it. So I had to make up a new one. I've thought of a few versions. I'm still trying to get it right. Here's one version. Imagine, if you will, that you have purchased the Hogwarts Castle Lego set. This is not entirely hypothetical, by the way. You have given up the dining room table for this project. You get about 3/4 of the way through, then a dog or a cat or maybe just a lurching adult bumps into it, broken. You weep. You've lost the instructions. Many pieces are stuck in the floorboards. Some are under the carpet. So you rebuild sans instructions. You don't have enough pieces, so you repurpose the space station, gathering dust in the corner, the Lego Friends camper set, and the soda shop. You use all these things and the picture on the box to create a new and somewhat peculiar Hogwarts castle. It's made of the wrong materials and put together in a different way, but it's oddly beguiling. This is translation. This is the Lego metaphor, part 2. You have a child. The child is young and the child likes Lego. You give the child a Lego airport set on a gift-giving occasion. Thanks, Dad, says the child. Shall we build it together, my child, you ask? Yes, Dad, but let us make a castle instead. My child, these parts and instructions are intended for the sole purpose of building an airport. Though I wish to fulfill your every dream, this one in particular is impossible. But Dad, says the child, I'm sure it can be done. And you are an old softy, so you comply. Without instructions, no charts, no use for the numbered bags, guardrails off, you hurtle forward. In this metaphor, the Lego set represents the original text. The instructions and intended use are the original language. And the form of the castle is the target language. The child is the commissioning editor, and the father is the translator. Quilting. What are you doing? I ask. Making a quilt, he says. How so? I ask. You don't have any fabric. You don't have needles and thread, or even a sewing machine. Well, he says, I have this beautiful old quilt. Look at the handiwork. And I have all these bits of colored paper. I even have scissors and glue. I will replicate the quilt using these materials. It will be perfect. But, I interject, how is it a quilt anymore if it is made of paper, not fabric? It will not warm anyone at night. It will not be soft to the touch. This project is futile, I conclude. Despite your negativity, he opines, I am not injured, for I shall create an exquisite simulacrum of a quilt, and it will be quilt-like. It will look like this quilt. I will hang it on the wall and admire it. This is an imperfect metaphor for translation. A translated book retains its functionality as a readable object. The paper quilt only looks like a quilt but does not have quilt functionality. On the other hand, in this metaphor, the original quilt loses some of its most essential features, and the paper quilt has the potential of becoming a beautiful work of art. This is about English. English is a monocrop. English, the great monocrop, its roots on an island, its tentacles all around the world, an invasive species with no natural predator. English is the potato crops for McDonald's French fries, the corn crops for corn oil and corn syrup, the soy crop for all manner of soy byproducts. In America, Iowa is farm country. The small farms are mostly gone now, and the land is covered with endless fields of corn and soy. The corn and soy are sent away and processed and returned to the land in the form of, I can't believe it's not what it appears to be, products. Butter, milk, cream, sugar, all made of soy and corn. The British Empire spread the English monocrop initially, but the American Empire is the greatest expert on the export of the processed and the packaged, the canned and the bottled, the I can't believe it's not real. On the island of the monocrop, we grow up surrounded by nothing but our own language, flat, rippling fields of English as far as the eye can see. Yes, there are small farms scattered about the landscape along the coast, primarily that grow and nourish non-Englishes, but those are other. English crowds in on those crops and stifles them whenever possible. If English was good enough for Jesus Christ, it's good enough for me, for all of us. New metaphor, a padded cell of monolingualism. Mixed metaphor, a cell padded by French fries, sealed shut by non-dairy corn soy-based butter substitutes. There are voices outside the cell, beyond the field, but we can't hear them. They don't matter to us. Other languages are decorations for our speech, a word here, a phrase there. They are the sriracha on our French fries, the matcha powder in our soy milk. Is that what it means to translate into English? Are we mixing matcha lattes? Translation is a monster. This is my finale. Dr. Frankenstein wanted to create a human. Instead of going about it in the usual way, he wanted to create a human out of parts of other humans. Dr. Frankenstein, in this metaphor, is the translator. He is like an icky version of the quilt maker. But in this case, the original text is simply generic. He wanted to make a human, i.e., to create life through his own ingenuity and resources without recourse to a womb. So the original is a human, and the man he creates is made of other man parts and stitched and stapled together, reanimated. But a reanimated patchwork, not a reanimated corpse. And when his experiment, i.e. his translation, stands up and walks, that's the special moment when a translator realizes this thing's got legs. It will stand on its own in its new incarnation. And the screams the monster is greeted with as it lurches through the streets, those are the screams of people who find translation fishy, inaccurate, unnatural. Even though this metaphor is imperfect, since the monster is modeled on the idea of a human and not a specific human, nonetheless, that moment of wonderment and horror at one's monster's animation, that is something most translators have experienced. Thank you.
I get the worst seats. I thought nothing would ever top having to follow Bora Chung and Anton Hur at the International Booker Prize shortlisty readings, but like now I have to follow that. So I'm sad. But yeah, and I'm talking in a very different register. I just wrote a book called The Philosophy of Translation that's going to be published in September by Yale. That some people in the room might be interested in. You could check it out. And what I was asked to do instead of coming up with genius metaphor poems was just to like talk about an issue or two. And the book is about half philosophy and half examples. So I had a lot of issues in the second half. And so I thought I would just talk about one or two of those. And I guess the main argument behind what I have to say and what I think is that one of the things that translation does is it redirects the text. It points at a new audience. So you have Vojna and Mir, and that's pointed at Russian readers, and someone turns it into War and Peace, and now that's pointed at American readers. And that's one of the ways in which translation totally changes what the text is, because you're just simply aiming it in a new direction at a new audience. And that, thinking of things that way is a good way to remember or keep hold of the fact that translation is contiguous with a lot of other things like editing, like putting a new edition out, like putting a new cover on a book. There are lots of, adapting it to a movie. There are lots of ways to redirect something at a new audience, and translation is one of them that happens to involve different languages. But I think that even though that's super obvious and simple, it does sort of clarify some things that people sometimes talk about when they're talking about translation. So I retranslated something. I retranslated these two lectures by Max Weber about what it means to be a scholar and what it means to like do political work. And they were given as popular lectures to a big crowd that like wanted him there in 1917 and 1919. And I wanted to translate them as popular lectures, like appealing, given by an intelligent person. Academic German is very laborious and involuted as styles go. I will admit that academic English is not always the snappiest prose in the whole world, but vigorous direct writing is still a good thing. And there too. And the earlier translations of Weber, even the better ones, had literal versions of his German. such as, quote, "We can see very clearly that the latest developments are moving in the same direction as," which I translated as, "the clear trend is towards." So that's 5 words instead of 16. Or another example, "Let us begin by making clear what is meant in practice by," which became, "let me first clarify." So how can we describe the difference between these translations? The standard thing to say, going back to Cicero and Horace and St. Jerome, is that you can translate word for word, which is bad, or you can translate the meaning, which is good. In these terms, we don't really have any way to say that the shorter Weber translations are good. We do have a way to say that the longer ones are kind of word for word, so that makes them kind of bad. But it's not about the meaning. Like, they do mean the same thing if we're talking about meaning as opposed to word for word. And it also seems weird to talk about the meaning at all, because this is just rhetoric. This is just like moving the listener along or the reader along. So, that doesn't seem like a way to understand what's going on in these translations. So a lot of people say that translators translate to create the same effect in the original, or as the original. And this is obviously true in things like jokes. Like when you translate a joke, you want to make it funny. It doesn't matter what it literally is about. So the effect thing is true as far as it goes, but it doesn't really go far enough, because effect is also a directional idea. Sorry. The quote-unquote same effect isn't in fact the same effect if it's pointed at a different audience. So if you say you're translating for the same effect, that risks sounding like what you're doing is working on the text. You're working on the words, the meaning, the effect, but really what you're doing is working to set up a relationship with new readers. That's where the effect happens. So the relational aspect is what really matters. And so in this Weber case, it's not clear that the translation is creating the same effect. It's just that the effect of the German prose is good for German listeners, and the effect of the English prose is good for English listeners, and that's different. The only way to argue that the clear trend is toward has the same effect as we can see very clearly that the latest developments are moving in the same direction as, is if you zoom all the way out and you say the effect is it sounds good. And the German one sounds good to the German listeners and the English sounds good to the English listeners. But if you've done that, there's no real point in talking about effect anymore. The rightness, sounding right, depends on the audience. It depends on the listeners' or readers' expectations of the genre of lecture, more than on anything we'd call intrinsic to the text. So this is a simple example because it's all rhetorical. There's nothing else there besides this relationship that the lecturer is managing the audience with. It obviously gets more complicated when you have substance or even literary quality. So I talk about 4 different things that you translate for, aside from this relationship and the literal meaning. And I label them sound, register, association, and movement. I was going to only talk about the sound examples because those are the best examples, but I don't know if I even have time for that, so maybe we can talk about that later. I can't resist doing one rhyming couplet, though. I mean, that's the really obvious case where you translate for sound. So there's a Swiss writer named Robert Walser who has this very jingly-jangly poetry where it's really just all about how it sounds, and that takes priority over kind of everything. So one couplet, for example, Nun sitzt die Zage genau wie solch ein Mann da, nichtsdestoweniger grüß ich dich herzlich, kleiner lieber Wanda. So there's the little rhyme there. But when you're translating it, we can lose Wanda's name, dear little Wanda. We can lose the fact that he's writing to her. None of that matters. What matters is keeping it sounding right. And now, so here's the translation. And now the shy lady sits there like such a man does. Nonetheless, I send you my warmest greetings along with Amanda's. So that's translating for the sound. I mean, and it goes the other way too. If you're translating and the English has unfortunate sound effects, then you have to get rid of them. That's just the reverse of if the original has cool sound effects, you have to add them. So in the Weber, probably the most famous line is, the literal translation is that politics means a slow, hard boring into hard boards, meaning like a laborious process of like doing the grind, but like keeping your political commitments and passion and a sense of perspective about things. But a hard, slow, boring into hard boards causes problems because hard means two different things, and they're two different German words, one meaning forcefully and the other meaning that the board is solid. So, okay, synonym. Politics means a slow, laborious boring into hard boards. And just that sheer accident of laborious, boring, and boards means that this does not work as a translation, even though that's what it's saying, right? So sound there too. I ended up with politics is a slow and difficult drilling of holes into hard boards, which I don't actually like that much. Drilling gives less of a sense of muscular effort because I picture like an electric drill, which is no problem. Laborious is more about the struggle, but calling it difficult means it might succeed or fail. So you're sort of changing the direction of the metaphor. And it's less snappy to say drilling of holes into as opposed to boring into something. But you just have to make those concessions because of the quirks of the sound of English. I guess I'll stop there, but I hope it was interesting to hear some sound effect challenges that translators face.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I love how varied these are, that they're all so different. I actually really like effect, so we can talk about that later. Maybe well, there's a little bit of that maybe in the little remarks I prepared, but so translation has always been a huge part of my life. As a bilingual person and an immigrant in the U.S., it's a way for my lives in Portuguese and in English to be in dialogue with one another. And being bilingual has made me hyper aware of the strangeness and newness of language. All my projects shared a preoccupation with language and with style. In my own writing, and my debut novel is coming out. I'm going to do the promotional bit. Thank you. My debut novel is coming out this October from Grove Atlantic. It's called Blue Light Hours, and it's about this woman from Brazil. She's a young woman in her first year at a small liberal arts college, and the relationship she forges with her mom over video calls. So the blue light from the title is the computer screens, the phone screens, always shining on them. So in this book, and also across very much everywhere in my work, I subscribe to the Anton school of thought that what you produce, across genres is all part of your oeuvre, and they're all part of what I am trying to achieve. But in my novel, I'm very much a minimalist, careful with language. I'm very measured, drawn to dialogue and the possibilities of speech. So the characters talking over Skype, which is a relic of a certain time. It's so bare to use the webcam and the conversation as some sort of stage and just have two people talking to one another. And as a translator, it's a little bit of my approach to listening and being present with characters. I'm also interested in how style captures emotion. If I move a word around, if the syntax is a little different, the emphasis is placed elsewhere, what does that do to the effect? Which is not to say that it needs to be mirrored at all. One of my favorite metaphors, I think a lot about translation metaphors as well, going completely off script, but responding to what's happening here, as translators are required to do, right? We have to respond to as the context shifts and language is always changing, we're kept on our toes. But one of the metaphors I think a lot about has to do with my experience as an immigrant too, trying to make the food of my childhood. But lemons that grow in Brazil are not the same lemons that grow here, and the potatoes are not the same, and the spices are not the same. The texture is different. The lemons are a little sweeter. It's so incredibly difficult to find, especially where I live. So I have to make it very differently. The recipe is completely different. The way that baking in high altitude environments requires different amounts of liquid and different temperatures. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to add more fat to this soup to get a similar soup, even though that one doesn't ask you to add half a cup of canola oil. My mom was horrified, but it's because the meat is different and the potato is different and the amount of starch is different. So sometimes to have a similar effect, maybe it needs to be as moving or something, but English behaves very differently. So now I have different raw materials. I'm gonna have to make it actually quite different, but it is to achieve the effect ultimately. But so for my translation, how am I doing on time? Okay, I'll just make eye contact with you. For my translation of The Words That Remain by Daniel Gardel, which is a book that is already preoccupied with language. It is about someone who wants to find the words to express himself and his gender identity and how he feels out of place. I mean, words is very much in the title. I had to prioritize a lot of the tone and the pacing and the rhythm. It was very, very deliberate in how the book made choices, around those things. Let's just say that maybe plot wasn't what was being prioritized, so I had to give the same weight to what was important in the book. So my process was maybe a little bit overzealous. I am a bit of a perfectionist and a overworker. So I had 2 copies of the book, a clean copy that I like to revisit so that I could, look at the book as if I'm reading it for the first time. And I had another copy that I annotated. So I kept lots of notes in the margins, my goals for any given paragraph, like I'm gonna make it funny or haunting, quiet or loud. And it was something to write towards a direction. I do the same with my own writing. Like, this is the note I want to hit. Like, I want this to be intimate, lyrical, slow, quick, breathless, like stage directions of sorts. And I also like to keep track of any patterns of meaning I see. So bits of repetition, echoes in the text, moments of rhyming action, as Charles Baxter defines it, that you have, a moment that is not the exact action that you've seen before, but that wants to call back to it. And some of this, of course, happens subconsciously, as Anton described yesterday, or through acquired instinct and practice and just reading a lot and writing a lot. But I'm also a nerd, and I like to be able to see the piece as a whole and to try to hold the whole thing in my brain and know how it's put together, see the dramatic arc, see the ups and downs of the cadence. So to achieve this, I did something that I did not get paid enough to do, which is that I recorded myself reading out loud a lot of the critical passages in the book. And those of you who have read The Words That Remain might guess which passages required me to do that. There's a very emotional scene at a river that I redid multiple times. And another one with the protagonist's father. There's a very violent scene that also required a lot of me. So I spent so much time on those. And then I read the Portuguese out loud too and recorded it to compare the sounds, the rhythm, the cadence, and the kind of emotion it projected and I would make adjustments to the English accordingly. And then sometimes I would listen to it a week later and I would be like, changed my mind, or I don't know what I was thinking. So in the end, I felt very much like I've authored this book alongside Stanu, or at least a version of it. I put my own emotions and pain into the book, the way an actor might use their own sadness to understand the character's suffering, and my own sense of glee to convey the moments of joy. I feel like we've been through it together, like a lot of ups and downs. And I see translation as an embodied practice. Sometimes when I'm translating or writing and a character makes a face or touches their own hair or, has any kind of mannerisms or quirks, I catch myself doing it too. Performing, trying on different ways of being so that I can chase the gesture with my words. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another person sitting here, as you can see, Anton. And since he gave the talk yesterday, so we are having his presence here. So please recall to your mind the brilliant lecture he gave yesterday and feed it into the current discussion. First of all, thank you, Jane, for inviting me to be part of this. It has truly been illuminating to hear the talks. And this is somewhat counterintuitive, actually, frankly, for me, but to listen to the talks and to listen to the great translators, it has been a kind of a process of self-discovery for me. And the reason, having grown up in a polylingual environment where translation is constantly happening, and in my own work, translation is something that has to be done because of the things that I work on. There are things that I do that I came to understand by listening to all of this, right? So an actual attention to translation as an intellectual activity is something that is one rarely comes across, at least in my world, even though that's constantly something that I have done throughout life. So really, it has been truly wonderful to participate in this, to hear all of these talks. The other thing that I think before this conference, the most illuminating experience regarding translation I ever had was in a conversation that was happening with Orhan Pamuk, the Turkish novelist who won the Nobel Prize. And in a discussion with faculty at a university, someone asked him, so what do you think of your books, that are translations of your books? And his simple response was, I have no idea. They're not my books. I have nothing to do with them. And so then someone pushed, said, well, there's one particular book that was translated by 2 different things, and do you care which one is better? And he said, this both seem fine to me, but honestly, I can't even read them. I can read them as someone else's books, but I don't read them as my own books. So I think the other side of it, that question of how creative an experience and a process translation is, one can see in all these different ways from very specific types of things one has to do to the wonderful metaphors that Daisy brought up, to the question of technical translation from German and so on, and then the relationship between your own writing and translation, as both of you have talked about. So it's really been wonderful. So the thing that sticks to my mind that I would like to hear from all of you would be something that has come up a number of times in the things that I've heard, which is the notion of translation as a calling. Because we have been told how incredibly difficult it is to translate intellectually, in terms of just the mental preoccupation and the terrible compensation conditions that we are dealing with as well, right? And yet there's something within that causes one to translate. I think partly it was jogged also by the reference to Weber's very famous essays about vocation. That's like something that is internal. So I would love to hear more from all of you about this sense of calling and vocation. Part of my interest in asking this is to see, is it the same calling, or are we talking comes under calling, or many different motivations as people, as individuals, as parts of communities, and that would for me would be a great way to kind of bring all of these things together. So that's my provocation or suggestion to where to go. First, I would love to hear from all of you, and then we can open it to a general conversation. So volunteers to talk about this.
I'll go first.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if I really thought of it as a calling, more like I am possessed by voices and they will not shut up. Like I saw on Twitter that something like 60% of the world don't hear a narrative voice in their head. And I found that very shocking because I'm constantly narrating myself, like, oh, I picked up the phone. Like, where is the husband? Like, when is the chicken arriving? Like, so I'm constantly narrating, creating language in my head. Like, there's a compulsive thing in there. When I listen to, like, when I was a kid and I still do listen to a lot of Mariah Carey, I'd be like translating the lyrics into Korean in my head. And any Korean song, I'd be translating that into English in my head. And, when you're watching a movie, you would be like making subtitles in your head. I thought everyone did that. I thought this was a very natural thing that all people who spoke more than one language did. And so when I learned that you can make money off of that, that was a really great moment because I have been translating for money since I was like 12 or something. And I'm 42 now. So for 30 years, I've had the same job because I'm very lazy and I don't want to pick up a new skill. And is that a calling? I feel like it's more of a very capitalist laziness where I use my comparative advantage and I capitalize on my assets to make money, and my subconscious seems to enjoy just like compulsively spewing out language. And if I can shape that into a novel that I can sell and then sell the foreign rights to and make it into a movie, and like, yeah, let's do it. I'm not sure if like calling sounds so sacrosanct. Like teaching is a calling. Like I don't have it, so I don't teach that much. Like there's so many, like being a nun is a calling, but I'm not sure.
So can I geek out about this word calling? Because that is the Weber title, which I changed. Because the German word is Beruf, which is connected to the word roof, which is a call. So it's etymologically like calling is right because it's this vocalization thing. So is vocation. Vocation and vocalization are the same word. So, but the problem is that doesn't work in English, because the calling is only like, divine and mystical and transcendent and like it's your whole life. The German word Beruf both means that, and it means like your job. It's just the normal word for your job. So, Weber has been miscast when it's translated in this super elevated sense, because like the essays are about like, how do you make your money? Like, how do you get tenure? How does German tenure work different than American? It's like nitty gritty job stuff, which the German word says. And vocation kind of means both, but it really only means the job stuff in the context of like vocational training. Like you don't go to a real college, you go to a vocational college, quote unquote. And so it's like this dismissive, like anti-transcendent elite word, right? So I ended up calling it work. So the lectures, which are called Science as a Vocation, the as a thing is another German translation problem, and Politics as a Vocation. First of all, science doesn't mean science in English. Only like a chemist and a geologist is a scientist, an art historian isn't. But generations of translators of German philosophy and sociology have convinced themselves that like, well, science sort of means any official body of knowledge. So you can just say science and mean humanities in English. And in fact, no, sorry, science doesn't mean that. So science as a vocation turned into the scholar's work, because I felt like work is the word in English that spans the range from like, you know, the future of work and these like big think pieces and like philosophy down to like, yeah, my work is to like go to the office every day or whatever it is that you do, right? So the politicians' work and the scholars' work. So I say that not only to geek out about German, but I think that connects to what you're saying, that like you can't, it's not actually that good an idea to think of it only in this like super mystical sense, because that's always going to be connected to like working conditions, like a job that you have to do.
I think actually Anton used the word that I often use, which is compulsion, because many times I've actually quit translating for any number of reasons that you can guess from hearing everybody talking about what it's like to be a translator, and also the issue of translating into English and what does that mean. All these things bother me, so I've quit it over and over again. But as a compulsion, I keep going back to it. However, my husband is a psychiatrist. That's how I can afford to be a translator. And he says that compulsion is an inaccurate term for what I'm describing, because a compulsion is something horrible and that impossible to live with, like, you know, like continuously scrubbing the kitchen counter until your hands bleed or something. Maybe that is what we're doing. Anton is saying yes. Okay, so yes, maybe compulsion is the word rather than vocation or work, because it's just not just work. Definitely not just work.
I totally agree, and I only have one thing to add, which is that people translate for different reasons. You know, let's just say maybe someone who picked up Mandarin when they were in undergrad at Harvard translates for a very different reason that I translate. The engagement I have with the texts and the impetus and my desire to be in dialogue with a voice or with a text doesn't have to be the same as other people's. So for me, I do think it is a vocation in a way, though it is very much labor and doesn't look that interesting, you know, the day-to-day. I too have spreadsheets and admin work and all of that. But I think the reason why I do it the way I do it, and that I have, you know, an advocacy side to it and all of that, is out of need. Not always just because I would love to be fighting for my rights all the time, or I would love for publishing to be diverse, or for people to read other countries with the same amount of respect that they read their own. That part is not out of vocation, that's for sure. It's, yeah.
Thank you. Since we're talking about metaphors today, I have a very nice metaphor I would like to share with you. It's a metaphor about the meaning of translation. One of the most important translators in Arabic is Ibn al-Muqaffa. He's a translator who lived 1200 years ago and translated Panchatantra from Persian. It's originally a Sanskrit text, but translated the translation from Persian into Arabic. But the way how that text made it into Persian was because of the king Anushirwan of Persia was looking for the plant of eternity that gives him kind of, you know, life for forever, immortality. So he sent his friend and physician to India to look for this plant. And when he came back after a few years, he brought with him this book. And this book translated it secretly because the king of India didn't allow anyone to read his book, so he had to find some people to allow him to read the books and translate Panchatantra into Persian. So this kind of metaphor about, you know, this plant of eternity is a beautiful metaphor for translation. But at the personal level, since I am an immigrant also, and I constantly, you know, translate to my kids, to my wife, to my students. I teach Arabic as a foreign language here at Brown. So translation is kind of part of who I am every day. Even when I listen to the news in BBC or NPR, I always think about it, you know, what about, you know, this specific thing about, you know, what do we say this in Arabic? Let's say today I read something very disturbing about the killing of 100 Palestinians yesterday. You probably have the news. And the way how BBC described that 100 Palestinians died, not killed. It's a massacre. Going back to translation, I first started translating poetry. And the idea was because when I read a text in English or in French, I don't, especially poetry, and I am a poet, so I don't fully kind of, or even if I feel the text, I feel the beauty of the text. I feel that I don't own the text unless I translate the text. So that translation, it's as if I'm trying to own it. And after that, when I finish that process, I feel that, wow, this is a beautiful text by Mark Strand or Charles Simic, or and then I feel kind of the compulsion as well to share that text with readers, and that's how it started. Unfortunately, I was trying to help my writing career to become a better poet, better writer through translation, but I think things worked the other way around, and unfortunately, I became kind of more a literary translator than writer, between teaching and um, having small children I have to care for every day, and translating at night. Unfortunately, sometimes I ask myself, what about your poetry career? Now you're almost 50 and you publish only 2 books of poetry. But in the same time, I think there is so much satisfaction also when I see kind of I'm translating novels and a lot of poetry into Arabic, and I don't regret. I mean, I wish that I focus more on my writing, but I feel that there is something happening, and I'm happy about that.
Great, thank you. Actually, so the variety of responses were exactly what I was hoping for in terms of getting these thoughts together. So we have about 10, 12 minutes left. So questions, comments?
Okay, thanks so much. Wonderful, wonderful presentations that could go in so many different directions. One of the things that's coming to mind, seeing how many different languages you represent, the entire conference is represented. I'm a Latin Americanist. Many of the authors that I deal with come across works themselves in translation. So one of my authors, for instance, a Peruvian theorist, read Russian literature in translation into Italian, for instance, right? Or we could think of Borges and Cortázar discovering Poe because he's being translated by Charles Baudelaire. So I'm really interested in this question of multiple languages, right, being involved in translation, not simply English, another language, and vice versa. And related to this, I wanted to ask a question that may be just a very weird question, but thinking about communities of translators, when you're translating an author, do you ever consult translations into other languages of the same author, or do you get to know the other translators into other languages of the same author? Is there any community around that and multiple people working with the text?
There absolutely is. Boracham has translators in Turkey, France, and Colombia. I know all of them. Oh, and someone, I don't know where the Arabic, I think Egypt. So I know all of them. We all follow each other on Instagram. Jennifer Croft has this great novel coming out called The Extinction of Irene Ray. And it's about this fictional author who has who gathers all of her translators in this forest, and then something really ominous happens. It's a really great book. I think it's coming out. I think it came out, or it's coming out next week. Yeah, it's coming out very soon. She's going to be in Boston next week. And so this is clearly something that it's definitely something that happens. Do we consult each other? Not really. What usually happens is we get to know I was the first person to translate Bora. So people would translators from other languages would come to me and be like, oh, is there a way for us to contact Bora? Is there a way for us to contact the rights holders? And I help them out. And sometimes they will look at my translation, and that's fine. But even when they do that, I always feel like their translation is their translation. Because you only you can consult, but I'm not writing in that language, so the other thing is there's the retranslation issue. Really funny thing that happened recently was that Love in the Big City by Sang-Young Park was sold to Brazil and Portugal, and they speak very similar languages. And my thought was, oh, you guys are not talking to each other, but okay. So we sold them separately, and they're both translating from my translation. And I thought that was just a really funny moment And I don't know what to think about that. I think it's kind of inefficient, but I don't know. They're choosing to do that, so I can't stop them. So yeah, I think there is definitely really interesting, really interesting dynamic. Some of us ignore each other. Like I don't know the Japanese translator of Love in the Big City. I feel like it would have been fun to talk to her a bit, but I guess we can talk to each other in Korean. But yeah, but we don't really have a speaking language in common, maybe. So yeah, it could be really fun, but it could also be like people completely ignore each other, and also read Jennifer Croft's book.
I'll say something very quickly, which is that on occasion, maybe out of curiosity, I will consult, but never without having a solid vision of my reading of the text first, so that I know what I want to propose, I know what I am doing, aesthetically. Then I might see, oh, what did they do? I wonder how they figured out this problem, and I'll be like, oh, interesting, they went in another direction. But so it is nice. It feels like a community. It's like a good friendship, but it is not exactly like you said, that we are just recycling the same work.
I've just done that in one case with Tomb of Sand, because I was in touch with the French translator. She was a bit ahead of me, and we were both tearing out our hair, so we started sharing little bits with each other, and that was, I found, illuminating, because there were many very ambiguous passages which were just hard to understand for anybody, even if you're just reading it in Hindi. And so to see like how somebody else tried to grab onto it. I also learned something interesting about translation into French, was that the domestication level is very high. So they, for example, the word pakora, for a fried snack, they translate as beignet. And Frank Wynn, the French translator, says, oh no, French people translate anything fried, like any small fried thing, as beignet, even like on their menus. But I was still very shocked, because it would never occur to me to translate a food item like that, But I think in France there's like a much stronger demand to have everything domesticated than there is in English or in other languages.
Yeah, I have also briefly a similar experience. I was lucky when I was working on the first novel, Autumn. One of the other translators also in Europe, the Polish translator, was working on the same book. So we reached out to each other, reached out to me, and we started a small group, actually a forum, where we shared questions and notes. And also he was able to send some emails to Ellie Smith and received some very brief answers, sometimes unfortunately not helpful at all, but it was good that we shared them together. And now we have a Facebook group actually with translators from other languages in Europe, which is also helps a lot. So I think that's a great way to use social media, to reach out to other translators, everywhere. Yeah.
Actually, the individuality of translation is amazing. I have one book that was translated twice into Persian. They're completely different, and both are correct. I was just blown away by seeing that in terms of what one presumes the text is saying and what technical vocabulary one uses, etc. Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. Okay.
I could say something about the thing, if no one else. I guess the two very tiny things are just on the conceptual level. You were asking about the multilinguality of the whole thing. I think English is multilingual. I think every language is multilingual. If you look at a movement like International Modernism, they're all reading the Russians and the French and the Germans and the English, and other countries and other non-European parts of the world are reading Europe, and vice versa somewhat. To the extent that it's possible, and the time. And so, I think it doesn't make sense to think of any language as having super firm boundaries if you're thinking in terms of creative writing. So I would just say that. And then personally, I'm an example of that. the way I first encountered the Norwegian writer I translate, who just won the Nobel Prize, Jan Fosse, is that American publisher wanted me to do a reader's report, or they wanted someone to do a reader's report, and they simply didn't know anyone who would do it in Norwegian, who knew Norwegian and who they knew. So they said, will you do a reader's report based on the German translation of this Fosse novel? Which I did. So I read it in German and wrote my report, which summarized the plot and then said, the book is total genius. You absolutely must do it. It's incredible. And they said, thank you very much. Here's your $100. And in fact, no, we're not going to do it. And I said, well, do you mind if I take the project somewhere else? Because I think it's great. I don't know if I even had to ask them, but like I thought I should for some reason. So found an American publisher using a sample that I had translated from the German, which obviously did not end up in the finished book, but that's what got the publisher. Found a co-translator, started learning Norwegian. That was that book. So yeah, I've been on both sides of that. And the German translator and I have now met, and like I've thanked him, and like we like each other and whatever. The new Fosse novel is called, in Norwegian, the literal translation is whiteness. And that is not a good choice of an English translation in the 2020s of this book, because it's not about what English language readers would think a book called Whiteness is about. So I ended up changing the title to A Shining, because it's about this white shining shape that he sort of sees in the forest, which I thought was kind of a cool title and a nice nod to an association that doesn't exist in the original of the Stephen King, Stanley Kubrick spookiness, right? And then I found out that the German translation of the book is called the German version of A Shining. And I was like, I'm not jealous, whatever. Like, I got it all from him. It's all thanks to him. But did he like borrow that from the English or come up with it independently or whatever? And I like reached out to him to be like, we should have a conversation about this and like transcribe it and make it an article or something, because it's kind of interesting. And never heard back from him because he was in Asia, but I just heard back from him the other day, and he was like, oh, I was so busy trying to like crank out the rest of Septology and this new book that, I couldn't even think about the title, and the editor suggested it to me. So I'm pretty sure the editor stole the English title. But
that happened to me for Love in the Big City. The German title for Love in the Big City is Love in the Big City in English. So that's the German edition of Love in the Big City. They didn't even bother translating it into German. And that title was my translation, because the working title for that was Manual for Finding Love in the Major Metropolis or something. Like, that's the literal. So I came up with Love in the Big City because of Jay McInerney's book. And Germany just stole the title, which is very typical of them.
Okay, so Michelle. Okay.
Julie?
Okay.
Michelle?
I have a question about titles. I mean, there's, for those of us who have worked extensively with publishers, there are things that are out of our control that I think readers don't know are out of our control. On 2 occasions, I found out that the publisher changed the title without even telling me. It ended up working fine. They were great titles, but I wish I'd found out not on Amazon. Are there any examples of some titles that the publishers ended up going with that you would have translated differently, or etc.?
2 things to say. One is that I've noticed that reviewers love to go after the title. Like, if they're going to critique the translation at all, which they often don't, then they will go after the title because it's such an easy target. And they don't even have to like open up the original book or anything. They can just, it's like a sort of armchair critique. But it's funny because we often aren't in control of our titles. That's the thing we have the least control over as translators, that because marketing and everybody's involved in the title. It's like the cover. We don't have that much control over it. And then the other thing I've noticed is with my Indian editors, at least, they very lightly edit inside the book. Like the line editing is pretty light, but they always want to change my title. And I feel like it's like this, they want to sort of put their imprint on the final product. And so I've learned how to kind of diplomatically cede some ground, because then they'll leave me alone with the rest of it, basically. But though sometimes it's like I submitted a manuscript recently, and I called it Our City, That Year. And the editor wrote to me a few days ago, and she said, "Would you mind if we took the comma out? I think that reflects the immediacy of the breathless tone of the novel." And I said, "Yeah, go for it."
Okay, so I think we are at time, so we can continue the conversations and the reception. I think one of the great things about this conference, in addition to the intellectual things, is a celebration of translation. So we can end with that and with these great colleagues who have produced fantastic works.